The marble floors of Metropolitan Trust Bank echoed with the sound of expensive heels as a woman in an impeccable navy suit walked through the main entrance, flanked by 3 federal agents. Branch manager Robert Sterling's face went from smug confidence to absolute terror as she approached his desk, where 8-year-old Maya sat crying, a red handprint still visible on her cheek. The woman placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder and looked directly at Sterling with ice-cold authority. "That's my daughter you just assaulted. I'm Dr. Patricia Williams, chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Before I tell you this shocking story of how one bank manager's racism led to the biggest banking scandal in decades, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about justice being served to those who abuse their power." Now, let me take you back to see exactly how this powerful moment came to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now let's rewind to see how this incredible confrontation came to be. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, and 8-year-old Maya Williams was excited about her special day with her mother. Dr. Patricia Williams had cleared her usually packed schedule to spend the morning with her daughter before an important afternoon meeting, something that happened rarely given her demanding position as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Maya bounced alongside her mother on the sidewalk outside their Lincoln Park home, her small hand gripping a colorful piggy bank shaped like a unicorn. Inside the ceramic figure, she had carefully saved $127 from birthday gifts, allowances, and helping neighbors with small tasks. Today was the day she would finally open her very own savings account, a milestone she'd been talking about for weeks. "Remember what we discussed about talking to the bank people," Patricia said gently, adjusting Maya's purple backpack as they walked. "Use your inside voice, listen carefully, and always be polite." Patricia had dressed down for the occasion, wearing simple jeans, a casual sweater, and comfortable flats. Without her usual business attire and the entourage of security and staff that typically accompanied her, she looked like any other working mother running errands with her child. Maya nodded eagerly, clutching her piggy bank tighter. "And I get to sign my name on the papers, right, Mama? Like a real grown-up?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Patricia couldn't help but smile at her daughter's excitement over what many adults considered mundane paperwork. The morning sun cast long shadows across Michigan Avenue as they approached Metropolitan Trust Bank, an imposing granite building that had served the downtown financial district for over 50 years. The bank's reputation was built on serving high-net-worth clients and maintaining an atmosphere of exclusivity and prestige. Patricia had chosen this particular branch, specifically because it was close to their home and offered a children's savings program that she thought would be perfect for Maya's first banking experience. As they climbed the marble steps leading to the bank's entrance, Patricia reflected on her own childhood experiences with money and banking. Growing up in a working-class family in Detroit, she had learned the value of every dollar through her parents' careful budgeting and her own part-time jobs throughout high school and college. Those early lessons had shaped not only her personal relationship with money, but also her professional commitment to ensuring that financial institutions served all Americans. Fairly, Maya pressed her face against the glass doors, peering inside at the polished interior with its high ceilings and ornate chandeliers. "It's so fancy, Mama. Do you think they'll really want my piggy bank money?" Patricia knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes, recognizing the hint of nervousness beneath the excitement. "Your money is just as important as anyone else's money in there," Patricia assured her. "Banks are supposed to help everyone, no matter how much or how little they have to save." It was a principle Patricia had fought for throughout her career, from her early days as an economics professor to her current role shaping monetary policy for the entire nation. The automatic doors swooshed open, and they stepped into the marble-floored lobby. The interior was even more impressive than it appeared from outside, with polished brass fixtures, leather seating areas, and the quiet hum of serious financial business being conducted. Several customers waited in line at the teller windows, most dressed in business attire and speaking in hushed, professional tones. Maya's eyes widened as she took in the grandeur, unconsciously lowering her voice to match the atmosphere. "Wow, Mama, this is like a palace for money," she whispered, causing Patricia to suppress a laugh at her daughter's innocent observation. They approached the customer service desk, where a young receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" she asked, her tone friendly but professional. "We'd like to open a savings account for my daughter," Patricia said, resting a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "She's been saving her money and is very excited to start banking with you." The receptionist's smile remained in place, though Patricia noticed a subtle shift in her expression as she took in their casual attire and Maya's colorful piggy bank. "Of course, let me see who's available to help you. Please have a seat in our waiting area." They settled into a pair of leather chairs near the window, Maya carefully placing her piggy bank on her lap and practicing the signature she had been working on for weeks. Patricia watched her daughter with pride, remembering her own excitement when she had opened her first bank account at age 16 with the money she had earned from her after-school job at the local library. "Mrs. Williams?" a voice called from across the lobby. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit approached them with what appeared to be a welcoming smile. "I'm Robert Sterling, the branch manager. I understand you're interested in our children's savings program?" Patricia stood and extended her hand. "Yes, thank you for taking the time to help us. This is my daughter Maya, and she's very excited to become one of your customers." Sterling's handshake was firm but brief, and Patricia noticed his eyes quickly assess their appearance and Maya's simple piggy bank. "Well, let's see what we can do for you," he said, though his tone suggested he was already making assumptions about their financial situation. "Please follow me to my office, and we'll discuss the requirements for opening an account." As they followed Sterling across the lobby, Maya whispered excitedly to her mother, "He seems nice. Mama, do you think he'll like my piggy bank?" Patricia squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly, unaware that their pleasant morning was about to take a devastating turn that would expose the ugly reality of discrimination that still existed within the institutions she worked so hard to reform. Robert Sterling's office was designed to impress, with rich mahogany furniture, diplomas, and awards covering the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling financial district. As Patricia and Maya settled into the leather chairs across from his imposing desk, Sterling closed the door and returned to his seat with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "So," Sterling began, leaning back in his chair and studying them with barely concealed skepticism, "do you want to open a children's savings account? I have to ask, what's your current banking relationship with Metropolitan Trust?" Patricia shifted slightly, noting the condescending tone but maintaining her composure. "We don't currently bank here, but I've heard excellent things about your children's programs. Maya has been saving diligently, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for her to learn about banking." Sterling's smile grew thinner as he glanced at Maya's colorful piggy bank with obvious disdain. "I see. And what kind of initial deposit are we talking about here?" He pulled out a thick folder of documents and dropped it on the desk with a deliberate thud. "Our children's savings program has specific requirements to ensure we're serving serious customers." Maya, oblivious to the tension building in the room, eagerly lifted her piggy bank. "I have $127, she announced proudly. "I saved it all by myself from birthdays and helping Mrs. Chen next door with her groceries." Sterling's expression shifted from skepticism to barely disguised annoyance. $127, he repeated flatly. "I'm afraid that's well below our minimum opening deposit requirement. Our children's program requires a minimum of $500 to open, plus a monthly maintenance fee of $25. Patricia frowned. knowing that most banks offered children's accounts with much lower minimums, often as little as $1. That seems unusually high for a children's program. Could you show me where those requirements are listed in your promotional materials? Sterling's jaw tightened at being questioned. Mrs. What did you say your name was again? Williams, Dr. Patricia Williams? Right, Dr. Williams, he said, emphasizing the title with obvious skepticism. These are industry-standard requirements for a bank of our caliber. We cater to families with significant assets, not... He paused, his eyes scanning their casual attire. Not everyone who walks in off the street. Maya looked confused, sensing the change in atmosphere, but not understanding what was happening. Mama, why is the man being mean? Did I do something wrong? Patricia placed a protective arm around her daughter while keeping her voice steady. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults need to have difficult conversations. She turned back to Sterling. I'd like to speak with your supervisor about these requirements. They seem inconsistent with federal banking regulations regarding discriminatory practices. Sterling's face flushed red at the mention of discrimination. Now hold on just a minute. This has nothing to do with discrimination. This is about maintaining standards. We have a reputation to uphold, and frankly, I don't think you understand the kind of clientele we serve here. He stood up abruptly, towering over them as his professional mask finally slipped completely. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, walking in here with your kid and a toy piggy bank, pretending to be some kind of doctor. But this is Metropolitan Trust Bank, not some corner check-cashing place. Patricia felt her own anger rising, but fought to maintain composure for Maya's sake. Mr. Sterling, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. I'm simply trying to open a savings account for my daughter, and I don't appreciate your implications about our legitimacy or worthiness as customers. Implications? Sterling laughed harshly. Lady, I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you straight out, you don't belong here. This bank serves successful professionals, business owners, people with real money, not welfare mothers with fake titles trying to scam their way into accounts they can't maintain. Maya began to tear up, frightened by the man's raised voice and harsh tone. Mama, I want to go home. I don't like the mean man. Patricia's protective instincts flared as she saw her daughter's distress. That's enough, Mr. Sterling. We're leaving. She stood and began gathering Maya's backpack, but Sterling wasn't finished. Oh, you'll leave all right, but not before I make something crystal clear. He moved around the desk, positioning himself between them and the door. Don't think you can walk into respectable establishments and demand special treatment. You people always think you're entitled to something, but this is the real world. This is a business, not a charity. The racial undertone in "you people" hit Patricia like a physical blow, but it was Maya's next words that broke her heart. Mama, why doesn't he want my money? Is it because we're black like Daddy said might happen sometimes? Sterling overheard, and his expression became even more contemptuous. Smart kid. At least someone in your family understands reality. He leaned down toward Maya, his voice dripping with condescension. Listen, little girl, your piggy bank money might buy you candy at the corner store, but this is a real bank for real people with real money. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as the moment everything changed. When Maya, tears streaming down her face, tried to clutch her piggy bank closer to her chest, Sterling roughly grabbed her wrist. Let me show you what belongs in a real bank, he sneered, trying to wrench the piggy bank from her grasp. Maya pulled back instinctively, crying harder as she tried to protect her savings. Please don't take my money, Maya sobbed. I saved it fair and square. Patricia stepped forward immediately. Take your hands off my daughter right now. But Sterling, completely lost in his racist rage and power trip, shoved Patricia aside and grabbed the piggy bank from Maya's hands, holding it up mockingly. This piece of junk? This belongs in the trash where it came from. That's when the unthinkable happened. As Maya reached desperately for her piggy bank, crying, "Give it back, that's mine," Sterling's free hand came down hard across her small face with a sharp crack that echoed through the office. The slap was so sudden and vicious that Maya stumbled backward, a bright red handprint immediately visible on her cheek as she collapsed into the chair. Too shocked to even cry for a moment, Patricia's world stopped. Time seemed suspended as she stared at her daughter's swollen face, at the animal satisfaction in Sterling's eyes, at the piggy bank now shattered on the floor with coins scattered everywhere. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Patricia said quietly, her voice carrying a deadly calm that would have warned anyone who truly knew her that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed Patricia's warning was broken only by Maya's quiet whimpering as she held her hand to her stinging cheek. Sterling, still high on his power trip, seemed oblivious to the gravity of what he had just done. Instead of showing remorse, he doubled down on his aggression. "Are you threatening me?" Sterling sneered, straightening his tie with theatrical arrogance. "Because if you are, I can have security remove both of you from this building and ban you from ever returning. In fact, I think I'll call the police and report you for creating a disturbance." Patricia knelt beside Maya, gently examining her daughter's face while fighting every instinct that screamed at her to unleash the full force of her rage on this pathetic excuse for a human being. The handprint was clearly visible, already beginning to swell slightly at the cheekbone. Maya's dark eyes were wide with confusion and fear, looking to her mother for protection and answers she couldn't yet provide. "It's okay, baby," Patricia whispered, her voice tender despite the storm raging inside her. "Mama's going to take care of this. Can you be brave for me?" Maya nodded shakily, wiping her tears with her free hand while still clutching the broken pieces of her piggy bank. Patricia rose slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. 25 years of climbing through male-dominated academic and financial institutions had taught her to channel her anger into precision rather than explosion. Every insult, every microaggression, every time someone had questioned her qualifications or suggested she was an affirmative action hire, had prepared her for this moment. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in boardrooms from Wall Street to Washington, "I want you to understand something very clearly. You just physically assaulted an 8-year-old child. Not only is that criminal battery, but you did it in the presence of multiple witnesses and undoubtedly on security cameras." Sterling scoffed, glancing toward the camera mounted in the corner of his office. "That was hardly assault. I barely touched the kid. And even if I did, who's going to believe your word against mine? I'm the branch manager of Metropolitan Trust Bank. You're nobody." The casual dismissal of his violence against Maya ignited something dangerous in Patricia's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "You're right that this comes down to credibility, Mr. Sterling. So let me ask you something. Do you know what the Federal Reserve Board does?" Sterling looked confused by the apparent change of subject. "What kind of stupid question is that? Of course I know what the Fed does. They set interest rates, regulate banks. What does that have to do with anything? And do you know who chairs the Federal Reserve Board? Who has the authority to investigate banks like Metropolitan Trust for discriminatory lending practices, consumer protection violations, and compliance failures?" Sterling's expression began to shift slightly, though his arrogance remained intact. "Some government bureaucrat. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play here, but the Federal Reserve Chairman has the power to launch investigations that can result in massive fines, regulatory sanctions, and even the revocation of banking licenses," Patricia continued, speaking as if Sterling hadn't interrupted. "The chairman can subpoena records, compel testimony, and refer criminal matters to the Department of Justice." Maya had stopped crying and was watching her mother with fascination, sensing that something important was happening, even though she didn't understand the words being spoken. Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, speed dialing a number while maintaining eye contact with Sterling. "What I want you to consider, Mr. Sterling, is what happens when someone with that kind of authority discovers that a bank manager has been systematically discriminating against minority customers, creating illegal barriers to account opening, and then physically assaulting children when confronted about these practices. Sterling's face had gone slightly pale, though he continued his bluster. "You can't intimidate me with government threats. I know my rights and I know bank regulations. Everything I've done today is within my discretionary authority as branch manager." Patricia's phone call connected. "Marcus, it's Patricia. I need you to send a security team to Metropolitan Trust Bank on Michigan Avenue immediately. There's been an incident involving Maya." She paused, listening. "No, she's not seriously injured, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention." Sterling's bravado wavered as he heard Patricia speaking with obvious authority to someone who was clearly responding to her requests without question. "Who was that?" he demanded. "Who were you talking to?" "The head of my security detail," Patricia replied matter-of-factly. "They'll be here shortly to escort us safely from the premises and to document the scene." She turned her attention back to Maya. "Sweetheart, can you tell me exactly what happened? I need you to use your words to describe everything Mr. Sterling did." Maya, still shaken, but growing more confident with her mother's calm presence, began to recount the events in her clear, innocent voice. "He said mean things about our skin color and said we didn't belong here. Then he grabbed my arm really hard when I tried to hold onto my piggy bank. And when I asked for it back, he hit me across my face." Sterling realized that Maya's testimony, delivered in the straightforward manner of a child who hadn't yet learned to lie or embellish, would be devastating in any formal proceeding. "Now wait just a minute. That's not exactly what happened. The child is obviously confused and—" "Mr. Sterling," Patricia interrupted, her voice carrying a new edge of steel, "I strongly advise you to stop talking. Everything you say from this point forward is being recorded and will be included in the federal investigation that I'm about to initiate." The mention of a federal investigation finally penetrated Sterling's arrogance. His face flushed as the implications began to sink in. "Federal investigation? You can't just threaten federal investigations because you didn't like how you were treated. That's not how this works." Patricia smiled for the first time since entering Sterling's office, but it was not a pleasant expression. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Sterling. Federal investigations aren't launched over simple customer service disputes. They're launched when there's evidence of systematic civil rights violations, discriminatory practices, and criminal behavior by financial institutions." She gestured around Sterling's office, taking in the awards and certifications covering his walls. "Tell me, in your 15 years as branch manager, how many children's accounts have you opened for black families? How many mortgage applications from minority customers have you personally approved? How many times have you used the phrase maintaining standards as a euphemism for excluding customers based on their race?" Sterling's mouth opened and closed without sound as he realized that Patricia was speaking with the knowledge and authority of someone who understood banking regulations better than he did. The casual way she referenced specific practices and used precise regulatory language was beginning to terrify him. "But more importantly," Patricia continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "how are you going to explain to federal investigators why you thought it was acceptable to physically assault a child in your office?" Outside Sterling's office, other bank employees had begun to notice the unusual activity. Through the glass walls, they could see the branch manager looking increasingly agitated while speaking with a woman and child. Some had heard raised voices, though the specifics of the conversation remained unclear. Maya had retrieved the broken pieces of her piggy bank and was quietly trying to fit them back together, her small fingers working patiently despite her obvious distress. The sight of his daughter attempting to repair what Sterling had destroyed filled Patricia with a cold determination that would fuel everything that came next. Sterling, finally beginning to grasp that he might have seriously miscalculated, made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. I'm sure we can work something out. There's no need to involve federal agencies or make a big production out of what was obviously a misunderstanding. 40 blocks away, in the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago's imposing neoclassical building, Dr. Patricia Williams's usual Tuesday morning had been proceeding according to her meticulously planned schedule. Her corner office on the 19th floor offered a commanding view of the Chicago River and the financial district beyond, a fitting backdrop for someone who wielded more influence over the American economy than perhaps anyone except the president himself. At 47, Patricia had become the youngest person and second woman ever appointed to chair the Federal Reserve Board. Her journey to this pinnacle of financial power had been anything but conventional. Born to a single mother in Detroit's struggling East Side, she had earned a full scholarship to MIT, where she graduated summa cum laude with degrees in economics and mathematics. Her doctoral dissertation on monetary policy and income inequality had been groundbreaking, challenging established economic theories while proposing innovative solutions to systemic financial discrimination. Her rise through academic and financial circles had been meteoric, but not without obstacles. Early in her career, she had faced the subtle and not so subtle discrimination that came with being a black woman in spaces dominated by white men. Department chairs who questioned her research methods, colleagues who assumed she was a secretary rather than a professor, and bank executives who dismissed her policy recommendations, had all unknowingly contributed to her steel, resolve and comprehensive understanding of how financial systems could be weaponized against marginalized communities. Now, as Federal Reserve Chairman, Patricia oversaw a staff of over 20,000 employees across 12 regional banks, managed monetary policy that affected the global economy, and wielded regulatory authority over virtually every financial institution in America. Her decisions could move markets, influence presidential elections, and determine whether millions of Americans could access credit, obtain mortgages, or build generational wealth. On this particular Tuesday, Patricia had cleared her morning schedule for something far more precious than economic policy: quality time with Maya. The irony wasn't lost on her that while she could influence the lending practices of every major bank in America, she rarely had time to help her daughter understand the basics of saving and personal finance. Today's visit to open Maya's first savings account was meant to be both a teaching moment and a rare opportunity for normal mother-daughter bonding. Her assistant, Marcus Thompson, had initially protested when Patricia announced she was taking the morning off. "Madam Chairman, you have the quarterly banking supervision meeting at 2, the conference call with the European Central Bank at 4, and the Treasury Secretary has been trying to reach you about the inflation reports." Patricia had smiled at Marcus's concern, knowing that his protective instincts came from genuine care for both her professional responsibilities and personal well-being. Marcus had been with her for 7 years, starting as a junior aide when she was still a regional Fed president and rising to become her most trusted confidant. As a young black man who had also navigated predominantly white institutions, he understood the unique pressures Patricia faced better than most. "Marcus, I've spent the last 6 months crafting policies to make banking more accessible to underserved communities. I think I can spare 3 hours to teach my own daughter about financial literacy." Her tone had been gentle but firm, the same voice that had convinced skeptical senators during her confirmation hearings that she could balance economic stability with social justice. Now, as Patricia sat in Sterling's office, watching her daughter piece together her broken piggy bank, she reflected on the bitter irony of the situation. Here she was, arguably the most powerful person in American banking, watching her child experience exactly the kind of discrimination she had spent her career fighting to eliminate. The policies she had championed, the regulations she had implemented, the training programs she had mandated, all of it had been insufficient to prevent this moment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Security team dispatched to Metropolitan Trust per your request. ETA 8 minutes. Do you need additional backup? Patricia glanced at the message while keeping her attention on Sterling, who was still attempting to minimize his actions. What Sterling didn't understand was that Patricia's calm demeanor wasn't uncertainty or weakness. It was the controlled response of someone who had faced down congressional committees, international banking cartels, and economic crises. She had learned long ago that the most devastating responses came not from emotional outbursts, but from methodical, systematic action backed by institutional power. Marcus had once asked her how she maintained her composure in hostile situations. "My father taught me something when I was Maya's age," she had explained. "He said that anger is fuel, not fire. Fire burns hot and fast and then dies out. But fuel can power an engine for thousands of miles if you know how to use it properly." Sterling's casual racism and violence toward Maya had provided more than enough fuel for what Patricia was about to unleash. But unlike Sterling, she understood the machinery of financial regulation well enough to ensure that the consequences would be both severe and lasting. Her phone rang, and Patricia glanced at the caller ID. Janet Chen, Deputy Inspector General for Consumer Protection. Patricia had personally recruited Janet from the CFPB 3 years earlier, recognizing her as one of the most thorough and relentless investigators in federal service. Janet's team specialized in cases involving discriminatory lending practices and consumer protection violations. "Janet, perfect timing," Patricia answered, never taking her eyes off Sterling. "I'm going to need your team to initiate a priority investigation into Metropolitan Trust Bank, specifically focusing on discriminatory practices in account services and potential civil rights violations." Sterling's face went white as he heard Patricia speaking with obvious authority. To someone in federal law enforcement, the casual way she referenced specific investigative procedures and used regulatory terminology was beginning to dawn on him as something far more serious than an angry customer making empty threats. "Yes, I'll have a full incident report to you within the hour," Patricia continued. "This involves physical assault of a minor, so you'll want to coordinate with local law enforcement as well. And Janet, this one goes straight to priority status. Full documentation, complete financial history review, and I want a preliminary report on my desk by end of business." As Patricia ended the call, Sterling's last vestiges of confidence crumbled. The woman sitting across from him wasn't just making threats or bluffing her way through regulatory language. She was speaking with the casual fluency of someone who worked within these systems every day. "Who exactly are you?" Sterling asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Patricia smiled again, the expression carrying no warmth whatsoever. "I'm someone who has spent her entire career ensuring that financial institutions serve all Americans fairly and legally. I'm someone who has the authority to investigate every aspect of this bank's operations. And most importantly, Mr. Sterling, I'm the mother of the child you just assaulted." The atmosphere in Sterling's office had fundamentally shifted. What had begun as a routine customer interaction had transformed into something resembling a crime scene, with Sterling slowly realizing he was no longer the person in control. Patricia's methodical approach to documenting everything, her casual conversations with federal investigators, and her comprehensive knowledge of banking regulations had created an aura of impending consequences that Sterling was beginning to find suffocating. Patricia opened her leather portfolio and began taking detailed notes, her pen moving across the paper with the precision of someone accustomed to creating official documentation. "Maya, can you tell me again what time we arrived at the bank?" she asked gently, her voice shifting to the warm tone she reserved for her daughter while maintaining the underlying steel that had Sterling transfixed. "We got here at 10:30, Mama, because you said we needed to be early for my appointment," Maya replied, unconsciously straightening in her chair as she sensed the importance of her mother's questions. Despite her young age, Maya had inherited her mother's sharp mind and was beginning to understand that something significant was happening. Patricia made a note of the time, then looked up at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, I assume this office has security cameras?" She gestured toward the device mounted in the corner. "And I assume all customer interactions are recorded for quality assurance and security purposes?" Sterling's mouth went dry. The cameras were indeed recording, and company policy required that all footage be preserved for exactly the kind of investigation Patricia was obviously preparing to launch. "The cameras they're just for security purposes. Internal use only." "Of course," Patricia agreed pleasantly. "Internal use, unless subpoenaed by federal investigators, requested by law enforcement, or required for regulatory compliance reviews. Standard banking practice." She made another note. "I assume Metropolitan Trust's legal department is familiar with federal evidence preservation requirements." The casual way Patricia referenced legal procedures that Sterling only vaguely understood filled him with growing dread. Her questions weren't random, they were systematically establishing a legal framework that would make it impossible for the bank to ignore or minimize what had happened. Patricia's phone vibrated with a text message. She glanced at it briefly before looking up at Sterling with renewed focus. "That was my security team. They're in the lobby now, along with a representative from the Chicago Police Department. Apparently, when you assault a child, even in a private office, it becomes a matter for law enforcement." Sterling's face flushed red. "Now wait just a minute. I think you're blowing this way out of proportion. Nobody needs to involve the police over what was clearly just a misunderstanding between customer and staff." "Mr. Sterling," Patricia replied, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a particularly slow student. "You physically struck an 8-year-old child hard enough to leave visible marks on her face. In what jurisdiction would that not be considered assault and battery?" She stood and moved to the window, pulling out her phone to make another call. Sterling watched nervously as she spoke in low tones with someone who was clearly responding to her with immediate deference and respect. "Yes, I need you to contact the office of the Comptroller of the Currency and file an immediate complaint regarding discriminatory practices and potential civil rights violations at Metropolitan Trust Bank, Chicago branch." Sterling felt his world beginning to collapse as Patricia continued her conversation. "Reference case number will be MTB 2024 CR 187. Yes, this involves physical assault of a minor customer. Priority status, full investigation scope." She paused, listening to the response. "Excellent. I'll have the complete documentation package to you within 2 hours." As Patricia ended her call, Sterling made a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Dr. Williams, I think perhaps we can resolve this internally. There's no need to involve multiple federal agencies over what was obviously a heated moment. I'm authorized to offer compensation for any inconvenience." Patricia turned from the window, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Mr. Sterling, do you understand what the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency does?" They regulate banks," Sterling replied uncertainly, his confidence continuing to erode. "They regulate national banks," Patricia corrected. "They have the authority to impose fines in the hundreds of millions of dollars, force management changes, and even revoke banking charters. They take civil rights violations very seriously, particularly when they involve violence against customers." She returned to her seat and pulled out a small digital recorder, placing it on Sterling's desk. "Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to provide your version of events for the official record. I suggest you think very carefully about your responses, because any false statements to federal investigators constitute felony charges." Sterling stared at the recorder as if it were a venomous snake. I don't think I should say anything without consulting legal counsel." "That's certainly your right," Patricia agreed. However, I should point out that your silence will be noted in the investigative record, along with the video evidence, witness testimony, and medical documentation of Maya's injuries. The mention of medical documentation sent another wave of panic through Sterling. Medical documentation? She's fine. I barely touched her. Patricia's expression hardened. Mr. Sterling, my daughter has visible bruising on her face from where you struck her. That requires medical evaluation and documentation, both for her well-being and for legal purposes. Would you like to revise your statement about barely touching her? Maya, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation while trying to understand its implications, suddenly spoke up. Mama, why is the man lying? He hit me really hard, and it still hurts. The innocent clarity of Maya's statement hung in the air like an indictment. Sterling looked from mother to daughter, realizing that he was facing not just an angry customer, but someone with the knowledge, resources, and determination to ensure that his actions had severe consequences. Patricia's phone rang again, and she glanced at the caller ID before answering. Marcus, yes, we're still in Sterling's office on the 3rd floor. Have Officer Rodriguez and the federal investigators wait in the lobby for now. I want to give Mr. Sterling a few more minutes to consider his options. As she ended the call, Patricia looked directly at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, you're about to meet with Chicago police officers and federal banking investigators. They're going to ask you detailed questions about today's events, your history with minority customers, and your knowledge of discriminatory practices at this bank. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had commanded respect in congressional hearings and international financial summits. You have two choices. You can cooperate fully, acknowledge your misconduct, and hope that your honesty is taken into consideration. Or you can continue to lie, obstruct the investigation, and face additional charges for interfering with a federal inquiry. Sterling's hands trembled slightly as the full weight of his situation became clear. The woman sitting across from him wasn't just another angry customer. She was someone with the power to destroy not just his career, but potentially his freedom. And the worst part was that every bit of evidence, from the security footage to his own admissions, supported her version of events completely. The knock on Sterling's office door came with the measured authority of law enforcement. Through the glass walls, Sterling could see a uniformed Chicago police officer accompanied by two individuals in dark business suits who carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Behind them stood a tall, well-dressed black man who seemed to be coordinating their movements with quiet efficiency. "Come in!" Patricia called out, her voice carrying none of the nervousness that had Sterling's shirt dampening with perspiration. As the door opened, she stood gracefully and extended her hand to the first agent. "Agent Martinez, thank you for responding so quickly." The lead agent, a professional woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, shook Patricia's hand with obvious respect. "Of course, Madam Chairman. We came as soon as we received your call. This is Agent Thompson from our Civil Rights Division, and Officer Rodriguez from CPD. Sterling's face went ashen at the title, Madam Chairman. But the full implications hadn't yet penetrated his panic-clouded mind. He remained seated behind his desk, paralyzed by the sudden influx of law enforcement personnel into his office. The tall man Patricia had been speaking with earlier entered last, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "Madam Chairman, I've secured the building's security footage and spoken with the bank's IT department. All relevant recordings from today have been preserved according to federal evidence protocols." "Excellent work, Marcus," Patricia replied, then turned to address the room. "Everyone, this is my daughter Maya, and this is Mr. Robert Sterling, the branch manager who is responsible for today's incident." Agent Martinez approached Maya with the gentle manner law enforcement officers used when dealing with young victims. "Hello, Maya. My name is Agent Martinez, and I'm here to help make sure you're safe. Can you tell me what happened to your face?" Maya looked to her mother for reassurance before answering in her clear, honest voice. "The man got really mad when Mama asked questions about my piggy bank account. He said mean things about black people and grabbed my piggy bank away from me. When I asked for it back, he hit me across my face really hard. Officer Rodriguez immediately began documenting Maya's statement, while Agent Thompson photographed the visible handprint on her cheek from multiple angles. Sterling watched in horror as the professional, systematic approach of the investigators transformed his minor incident into documented evidence of criminal assault. "Mr. Sterling," Agent Martinez addressed him directly, "I need you to stand up, please. You're under arrest for battery against a minor child." "Wait!" Sterling finally found his voice, panic making it crack. "This is all a huge misunderstanding. I'm the branch manager here. I don't know who this woman thinks she is, but she can't just walk in here and have me arrested." The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at Sterling, with expressions ranging from professional detachment to barely concealed disgust. Agent Martinez continued reading him his rights, while Agent Thompson took detailed photographs of the broken piggy bank and scattered coins on the floor. "Mr. Sterling," Patricia said quietly, drawing his attention as Officer Rodriguez placed handcuffs on his wrists, "you asked who I think I am. Allow me to properly introduce myself." She reached into her purse and withdrew her official Federal Reserve identification, holding it where Sterling could clearly see the seal and her photograph. "I am Dr. Patricia Williams, Chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. I have oversight authority over every bank in the United States, including Metropolitan Trust." Sterling's knees buckled slightly as the full magnitude of his situation crashed over him like a tsunami. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, the most powerful person in American banking, the woman whose policies affected every financial institution in the country. And he had just discriminated against her, insulted her, and physically assaulted her child. "No," he whispered, staring at the identification as if it might transform into something less devastating. "No, that's not. You can't be—" Marcus stepped forward with a tablet, showing Sterling the Federal Reserve website with Patricia's official photograph and biography prominently displayed. Dr. Patricia Williams was confirmed as Fed Chair 18 months ago by a unanimous Senate vote. She previously served as president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and holds a Ph.D. in economics from MIT. Agent Martinez finished reading Sterling his rights and began leading him toward the door. As they passed Patricia, Sterling made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his life. "Dr. Williams, please, I didn't know who you were." "If I had known, I never would have. This was all just a terrible mistake." Patricia looked at him with the cold professionalism that had intimidated senators and World Bank presidents. "Mr. Sterling, the fact that you didn't know my position is precisely the problem. You felt comfortable discriminating against and assaulting my daughter because you assumed we were powerless to fight back." She moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You thought you could abuse a black woman and her child because you believed there would be no consequences. You were wrong." As Sterling was led from his office in handcuffs, other bank employees gathered in the hallway, their faces reflecting shock and confusion at seeing their branch manager arrested. Word spread quickly through the building that federal agents were involved, and that the incident somehow concerned the highest levels of financial regulation. Patricia knelt down beside Maya, who was watching the proceedings with wide eyes. "Are you okay, sweetheart? I know this has been scary." Maya nodded solemnly.
"Mama, are you really the boss of all the banks?"
Patricia smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth she had shown since Sterling's assault. "I help make sure banks treat everyone fairly, baby. Today, we're going to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to other children." Agent Thompson approached with evidence bags containing the broken piggy bank and scattered coins. "Madam Chairman, we'll need Maya to be examined by a pediatric specialist to document her injuries, and we'll need formal statements from both of you." "Of course," Patricia replied, standing and gathering Maya's backpack. "Agent Thompson, I also want a complete audit of this branch's customer service records, particularly focusing on account applications and approvals by demographic data." I suspect today's incident represents a pattern, not an isolated event. As they prepared to leave Sterling's office, Maya tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, does this mean I still can't have my bank account?" Patricia's expression softened as she looked down at her daughter. "Oh, sweetheart, you're going to have the best bank account any little girl has ever had. And more importantly, we're going to make sure that every other little girl and boy can have one too, no matter what they look like." The Federal Reserve Chairman and her daughter walked out of Metropolitan Trust Bank, surrounded by federal agents, leaving behind a branch manager facing criminal charges and a financial institution about to undergo the most thorough regulatory scrutiny in its 50-year history. Within hours of Sterling's arrest, the news had reached the highest levels of Metropolitan Trust's corporate hierarchy. CEO Jonathan Blackstone was pulled from a board meeting in New York when his chief counsel burst in with news that would send the bank's stock price into free fall by market close. "Sir, we have a situation in Chicago," attorney Margaret Foster announced, her usual composure cracked by the magnitude of what she was reporting. "Our Michigan Avenue branch manager has been arrested for assaulting the 8-year-old daughter of Federal Reserve Chairman Patricia Williams." The silence in the boardroom was deafening. 12 board members, collectively worth billions of dollars and representing decades of banking experience, stared at Foster as if she had announced the end of the world. In many ways, for Metropolitan Trust, she had. Blackstone's face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly pale gray. "Please tell me you're joking, Margaret. Please tell me our branch manager did not assault the Federal Reserve Chairman's child." "I'm afraid it's true, sir. Agent Martinez from the FBI's Civil Rights Division has already been in contact with our legal department. They're requesting immediate preservation of all customer service records, employee training materials, and internal communications related to account opening procedures." Board member Elizabeth Crawford, a former Treasury Department official, leaned forward with obvious alarm. "Jonathan, if Patricia Williams is personally involved in this, we're not just looking at a simple assault case. She has the authority to investigate our entire operation. This could trigger a full-scale regulatory review." Meanwhile, in Patricia's Federal Reserve Office, a crisis response team had assembled within 2 hours of the incident. Deputy Inspector General Janet Chen had arrived from Washington with a team of investigators, while Marcus coordinated with the Chicago Fed's Examination Department to begin an immediate review of Metropolitan Trust's practices. "Madam Chairman," Janet began, spreading files across the conference table, "we've already identified several red flags in Metropolitan Trust's demographic data. Their account approval rates for minority applicants are 40% lower than the industry average, and their branch in predominantly white neighborhoods show almost no Black or Hispanic customers despite the surrounding demographics." Patricia, now back in her professional environment, wearing a fresh suit after taking Maya to the pediatric specialist, studied the preliminary data with the focused intensity that had made her reputation. Maya was safely at home with Patricia's mother, who had flown in from Detroit within hours of learning about the assault. "What about employee training records?" Patricia asked, making notes as she reviewed the statistics. Agent Thompson, who had joined the team after processing the crime scene, pulled out another folder. "That's where it gets interesting, Madam Chairman. Metropolitan Trust has no documented diversity training, no anti-discrimination policies specific to customer service, and no oversight mechanisms for monitoring demographic disparities in service delivery." Marcus brought up additional data on his laptop. "I've been analyzing their internal communications, and there's a pattern of emails between branch managers discussing maintaining clientele standards and protecting the bank's reputation in ways that strongly suggest coded language for discriminatory practices." Patricia's jaw tightened as she absorbed the scope of what they were uncovering. "So Sterling wasn't a bad apple. He was following institutional culture," Janet nodded grimly. "It appears so. We found similar patterns at their branches in Naperville, Evanston and Highland Park, all affluent, predominantly white areas with mysteriously low minority customer bases, despite significant minority populations in the surrounding communities. The investigation team worked through the afternoon, building a comprehensive picture of systematic discrimination that went far beyond one manager's racist outburst. Phone records showed regular communication between Sterling and other branch managers, sharing strategies for discouraging undesirable customers while maintaining plausible legal cover. Meanwhile, news of Sterling's arrest had begun spreading through social media and financial news outlets. Metropolitan Trust began trending on Twitter as customers shared their own experiences of discriminatory treatment at various branches. The stories that emerged painted a disturbing picture of consistent patterns: minority customers being told about higher minimum balances, additional documentation requirements, and longer processing times that mysteriously didn't apply to white customers. Patricia's phone rang with a call from Treasury Secretary David Martinez, a long-time colleague who had worked with her on previous civil rights initiatives in banking. "Patricia, I just heard about what happened to Maya. How is she doing?" His concern was genuine. He had met Maya at several official functions and always remembered to ask about her academic achievements. "She's resilient." "David, but this shouldn't have happened to any child," Patricia replied. "What we're uncovering suggests this incident was part of a much larger problem." "I've already spoken with the Attorney General," Martinez continued. "Justice Department is prepared to file civil rights charges if the evidence supports it. We can't have financial institutions operating like it's 1950. As the investigation expanded, Patricia found herself in the unusual position of being both a victim seeking justice and a regulator with the power to deliver it. She had recused herself from direct involvement in the regulatory response, but her staff kept her informed of developments that grew more damning by the hour. Agent Thompson called with an update on Sterling's interrogation. "Madam Chairman, he's beginning to cooperate. He's provided names of other managers who were part of what he calls unofficial guidance on customer screening. He's also admitted to keeping separate files on minority customers who complained about service, flagging them for additional scrutiny on future visits. The systematic nature of the discrimination was becoming undeniable. What had started as one man's racist assault on a child had exposed an institutional culture of exclusion that violated multiple federal laws and banking regulations. Patricia looked out her office window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about all the families who had been turned away from financial services they deserved, all the children who had been denied the chance to learn about banking because of the color of their skin. Maya's tears that morning represented thousands of dreams deferred by institutional racism disguised as business policy. "Janet," Patricia said, turning back to her team, "I want a complete forensic audit of their lending practices, hiring patterns and vendor relationships. If they've been discriminating against customers, chances are they've been discriminating against employees and minority-owned businesses too." The investigation that had begun with a broken piggy bank was expanding into something that would reshape how financial institutions operated across the entire United States. 6 months after Maya Williams walked into Metropolitan Trust Bank with her unicorn piggy bank, the financial institution that had operated with impunity for 5 decades faced the most comprehensive regulatory sanctions in banking history. The boardroom, where CEO Jonathan Blackstone had first learned of Sterling's arrest, now hosted a very different kind of meeting. Federal regulators filled the polished conference table, led by Deputy Comptroller Sarah Chen and accompanied by representatives from the Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The bank's legal team, now numbering 12 attorneys from 3 different firms, sat across from them with expressions of barely contained panic. "Mr. Blackstone," Deputy Comptroller Chen began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. After a 6-month investigation into Metropolitan Trust's practices, we have identified systematic violations of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Community Reinvestment Act, and multiple consumer protection statutes. The evidence was overwhelming. Federal investigators had uncovered email chains between branch managers coordinating discriminatory practices, draining materials that contained coded language for racial profiling, and statistical evidence showing consistent disparities in service delivery across all demographic categories. Most damaging was Robert Sterling's cooperation with investigators. Facing federal civil rights charges in addition to assault charges, he had provided detailed testimony about the institutional culture that had encouraged and rewarded discriminatory behavior. His recordings of management meetings revealed executives explicitly discussing strategies to maintain neighborhood character and protect property values through selective customer service. The total penalties being assessed today amount to $2.8 billion, Chen continued, as Blackstone visibly aged before her eyes. Additionally, Metropolitan Trust will operate under a federal consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms to all customer service operations, mandatory diversity training for all staff, and quarterly reporting on demographic data for all customer interactions. But the financial penalties, crushing as they were, represented only part of the consequences. The bank's charter was being reviewed, potentially leading to forced closure of discriminatory branches. Stock prices had fallen 60% since the initial incident, and major institutional investors were demanding complete management changes. Patricia Williams, who had recused herself from direct regulatory involvement but remained informed of developments, found herself in a unique position to ensure that the consequences extended beyond this single institution. Working with Treasury Secretary Martinez and congressional leaders, she had helped draft new legislation requiring all financial institutions to undergo regular civil rights audits and maintain transparent demographic reporting. Meanwhile, Maya had returned to her normal routine, though she carried herself with a new understanding of both injustice and the power of speaking truth. Her story had inspired thousands of other families to come forward with their own experiences of banking discrimination, creating a national conversation about access to financial services. The pediatric specialist who had examined Maya's injuries testified at Sterling's criminal trial, providing medical evidence of the assault that resulted in his conviction on battery charges. He received 2 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowable, with Judge Maria Santos noting that his position of authority and the victim's age justified the harshest possible punishment. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Santos had said during sentencing, "you used your position to humiliate and harm a child because of your racial prejudices. Your actions represent everything that is wrong with institutional discrimination." And this sentence reflects society's rejection of such behavior. For Patricia, the personal healing had been just as important as the institutional changes. Maya had been seeing a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, helping her process the experience while maintaining her natural confidence and curiosity about the world. The broken piggy bank had been carefully repaired and now sat on Maya's dresser as a reminder of both vulnerability and strength. Dr. Williams had also used her platform to establish the Maya Williams Foundation for Financial Inclusion, a non-profit organization dedicated to expanding banking access in underserved communities. The foundation's first initiative involved partnering with community banks to create truly accessible children's savings programs with no minimum balances and comprehensive financial literacy. Education. The ripple effects extended far beyond Chicago. Other banks, terrified of facing similar scrutiny, began voluntary reviews of their customer service practices. The American Bankers Association issued new guidelines for diversity and inclusion, while business schools across the country added Patricia's case study to their curricula as an example of how institutional bias could destroy even the most established organizations. Metropolitan Trust itself underwent a complete transformation. New CEO Elena Rodriguez, the first Latina to lead a major Chicago bank, had been brought in specifically to rebuild the institution's reputation and practices. Under federal oversight, the bank had hired 200 new employees, prioritizing candidates from diverse backgrounds, and had opened 3 new branches in previously underserved communities. The most significant change was cultural. Where Sterling had once rewarded managers for maintaining clientele standards, Rodriguez implemented performance metrics based on customer satisfaction across all demographic groups. Branch managers now competed to demonstrate their commitment to inclusive service, knowing that discrimination would result in immediate termination and potential federal prosecution. Agent Martinez, who had arrested Sterling that morning 6 months earlier, visited Patricia's office to deliver the final investigative report. Madam Chairman, I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in pursuing this case. The reforms we've achieved will protect countless families from experiencing what Maya went through. Patricia accepted the report with mixed emotions. Agent Martinez, I wish we hadn't needed to go through this to create change. But I'm grateful that Maya's experience will help other children avoid similar treatment. The final element of justice came in an unexpected form. The coins from Maya's broken piggy bank, carefully preserved as evidence throughout the investigation, had been returned after Sterling's conviction. Patricia and Maya had decided to use that $127 to open savings accounts for 12 other children whose families had been denied banking services by Metropolitan Trust as they stood in the lobby of a community bank that had welcomed them with respect and enthusiasm. Maya looked up at her mother with the wisdom that sometimes comes early to children who have faced injustice. Mama, do you think what happened to me helped other kids? Patricia knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes, seeing in them both innocence and strength. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes when bad things happen to good people, we can use that experience to make sure good things happen to everyone else. 3 years after Maya Williams walked into Metropolitan Trust Bank with her unicorn piggy bank, the financial landscape of America had been permanently altered. What began as one child's excitement about opening her first savings account had evolved into the most comprehensive banking reform movement since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Maya, now 11 years old and in 6th grade, had grown into a confident young advocate who spoke regularly at financial literacy events and youth empowerment conferences. Her natural intelligence, combined with her unique experience, had made her a powerful voice for change. She had testified before Congress about the importance of accessible banking for children, her clear, honest testimony moving senators to tears and inspiring bipartisan support for new legislation. When I was 8, I thought all banks were like palaces for money, Maya told a packed auditorium at the National Urban League conference. Now I know that banks are supposed to be like libraries for money, places where everyone is welcome and everyone gets help learning. Her speech received a standing ovation, but more importantly, it inspired dozens of community banks to adopt her library model of inclusive financial services. Patricia's role as Federal Reserve Chairman had been transformed by her experience as well. The Maya Williams Banking Equality Standards, developed in collaboration with congressional leaders and civil rights organizations, had become the gold standard for measuring institutional discrimination in financial services. Every federally regulated bank now underwent mandatory annual audits using Patricia's comprehensive framework for detecting and preventing discriminatory practices. The foundation Patricia had established in Maya's name had grown into a national organization with chapters in 47 states. The Maya Williams Foundation for Financial Inclusion had helped over 50,000 children open their first savings accounts, provided financial literacy education to more than 200,000 families, and created a network of community banking partnerships that prioritized accessibility and inclusion. Robert Sterling's story had become a cautionary tale taught in business ethics courses across the country. After serving 18 months in federal prison for civil rights violations and assault, he had struggled to find employment in any customer-facing role. His case had become the defining example of how individual prejudice, when enabled by institutional culture, could destroy both personal lives and corporate enterprises. Sterling now worked as a night shift warehouse supervisor, a dramatic fall from his former position as a respected banking executive. In rare interviews, he expressed remorse for his actions, while acknowledging that his punishment had been appropriate. "I destroyed a child's sense of safety and security because of my own ignorance and prejudice," he had told a criminal justice reform group. "No child should ever experience what I put Maya through." Metropolitan Trust Bank had undergone such complete transformation that it barely resembled its former self. Under the leadership of CEO Elena Rodriguez, the institution had become a model for inclusive banking practices. The bank's Maya's Promise program guaranteed that any child could open a savings account with just $1, receive free financial literacy education, and access banking services without discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or family income level. The cultural change within Metropolitan Trust had been revolutionary. Branch managers who once competed to exclude customers now competed to demonstrate their commitment to inclusion. The bank's customer satisfaction scores had increased dramatically, particularly among minority customers, and employee retention had improved as the toxic culture of discrimination was replaced with values of service and respect. The broader impact on American banking had been equally significant. The Patricia Williams effect, as economists now called it, had led to unprecedented accountability in financial services. Banks that once operated with impunity now understood that discrimination could result in existential regulatory scrutiny. Consumer complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped by 60% nationwide as institutions proactively reformed their practices rather than risk the kind of devastating consequences Metropolitan Trust had faced. Patricia's influence extended far beyond banking regulation. She had been invited to speak at the United Nations about financial inclusion as a human right, had advised the World Bank on combating discriminatory lending in developing nations, and had become one of the most respected voices on economic justice globally. Her academic work on dignity economics, the theory that financial systems must preserve human dignity as well as economic efficiency, had influenced policymakers. Across 6 continents, the personal relationship between Patricia and Maya had also evolved. What could have been a source of permanent trauma had instead become a foundation for mutual purpose and strength. Maya had learned that she could face injustice and emerge stronger, while Patricia had discovered that her greatest professional achievements came from protecting not just economic stability, but human dignity. During their weekend walks through Chicago's Lincoln Park, where they still lived, Maya would often ask her mother about the complexities of economic policy and social justice. These conversations had become some of Patricia's most cherished moments, watching her daughter develop the analytical skills and moral compass that would undoubtedly shape her own future leadership. "Mama, do you think what happened to me will keep happening to other kids?" Maya had asked during one of their recent walks. Patricia considered the question carefully before responding. "There will always be people who carry prejudice in their hearts, sweetheart. But what we've built together, the laws, the programs, the awareness, makes it much harder for those people to act on their prejudice. And when they do, there are consequences. The most powerful testament to their impact came in the form of letters they received regularly from families across the country. Parents wrote to thank them for making banking accessible to their children. Teachers described how Maya's story had inspired their students to pursue financial literacy. Community leaders credited the foundation's programs with transforming their neighborhood's access to banking services. One letter that particularly moved Patricia came from a mother in Detroit. "My son Marcus was denied a savings account at 3 different banks before your foundation helped us find a bank that welcomed him. He's now in college on a partial scholarship, and he says that learning to save and manage money gave him the confidence to believe in his own future. Thank you for making sure no child has to experience what Maya went through." As Patricia finished reading the letter to Maya, her daughter smiled with the satisfaction that comes from knowing your suffering has prevented others from suffering the same way. "So we really did help other kids, didn't we, Mama?" "Yes, sweetheart. We turned your pain into other people's protection. That's what courage looks like. What moments in your life have opened your eyes to injustice? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and found the strength to speak up? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to find their voice when it matters most. If this story of courage and transformation moved you, please hit that like button to help it reach others who need to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. And remember, sometimes the smallest acts of courage, like an 8-year-old girl trying to open her first bank account, can reshape the world. What change will you help create today? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.